Chasing Leviathan is a podcast about pursuing truth, one big question at a time through the discipline of listening. Truth is too big to tame, but if we pay close attention, we might get the chance to glimpse something truly magnificent. So please join me in this pursuit, 1 week at a time. Hello and welcome to Chasing Leviathan. I'm your host, PJ Wehry, and I'm here today with Dr. David A. Banks, lecturer in geography and planning at the University of New York in Albany, and a proud delegate to the Troy Area Labor Council. And we're here today to talk about his book, The City Authentic. Dr. Banks, wonderful to have you on today.
Thanks for having me.
So the initial question I ask is always, why this book? You know, both its purpose, but also like, what was the journey that led you to pursue this?
That's a great question. It's a question I make my students always answer when they have to write a substantial paper. It's like, why now, right? Why this? And the answer is, to a large degree, the book is kind of personal in that, I moved from Florida. I grew up in South Florida, and then moved to upstate New York, where I currently live is in Troy. It's just north of Albany. And at first, I was just like so enamored by how old everything was. It was like, if it had been built before World War II, it was like ancient to me. So that just kind of caught me immediately. And I think I was like really well positioned to fall for the marketing that would then become very popular of the region, right? Which was that you could live out these authentic urban lifestyles on the cheap, right? So you don't have to go live in New York City. You can have your cute little farmer's market thing and go to brunch at a place that's like two nouns with a plus sign in the middle, baker. Baker and grass or something, tinkerer and bathtub or whatever, just like two nouns just put together. And I was like, this is great. I love this. And then it was when I was in a this is true, a hardware store themed bar and restaurant called The Shop, right?
As it is, yeah.
Yeah. And you'd like the beer taps, like the pulls were like old tools, and like there was like the menu looked like an old retro Sears catalog or something, and like kind of looking around here, I'm having a great time, spending way too much money on like poutine and an aviator cocktail, right? I'm enjoying this immensely, but I realized, like, why? Like, what the hell is this, right? Like, why am I in it could just be a bar. It doesn't need to be themed after the last thing that was in this building, which was a hardware store, right? And that just kind of got the wheels turning. And then I would start seeing stuff on social media that was like propping this stuff up. But then I also realized that everywhere, while yelling that they are very unique and only from here can you get this experience, everywhere was saying that, and they all kind of looked about the same, and they all seemed to share a similar aesthetic that they seem to be learning from each other on Instagram mostly, and it turns out I was right. There's this kind of like relationship among small business owners and economic development professionals in cities that they learn from each other, obviously, just like anyone else of a sufficiently complicated human task. They learn from each other, and but now that social media kind of orders that, it organizes it, you get like this incredibly specific kind of environment and tastes that and nouns, naming conventions that all kind of mimic each other. But then the ultimate irony is that they all do that to claim that they're different.
Yeah, you have the naming conventions and the color palette, right? Like there's like it's the Instagram oh man. Sorry.
Yeah.
So my day job is as a digital marketer. So
Yeah,
like this is
I got you.
unfortunate. Yeah, unfortunately,
I
I'm
got
like,
your number.
oh,
Yeah.
I'm right back. I'm right back in all the
Yeah.
meetings that I have.
Yeah.
So for the tagline for the book is how the attention economy builds urban America. For I think most people will be familiar with what urban America means, but for those who aren't familiar, when you say attention economy, can you describe what that is and how that fits into your discussion of social media?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. It's a really important concept, attention, that is very under theorized. There isn't a ton of information or like people who thought deeply and for a long time about the concept of paying attention to things. That and what is often the case is once a sufficient number of like the literati think that something is going away, then everyone pays attention to it, right? And so it's only now that we're afraid that we're losing it that everyone wants to talk about it. And the term attention economy, which I've gotten some people really hate this term, and for I think pretty decent reasons. But when you're talking about the cover of the book, you kind of just you have to pick words that resonate with people that are interested in the same topic. And unfortunately, better or worse, that's what works. And so attention economy is about like both paying for your attention, literally an economy, right? People pay and sell attention, but also the idea that attention is a finite resource that itself acts like money and has to be meted out and exchanged in really specific ways. And of course, like attention is always already talked about in econometric terms, right? We pay attention. We give our attention, right? So like these are all things that at the very base, you don't have to get too much in like linguistics theory, which I know nothing about, but like I only taught like one intro to comms theory class, but you don't need to get too far in the weeds there to start realizing that like we pick those words for a reason, and it's because it kind of acts that way.
Yeah, even as you've been talking about this, I remember I think it's like 10 to 15 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, but I want to say 10 to 15 years ago now, that the value of consumer data passed the price, like the value of oil, right? And it was that moment when social media kind of took over, and that's kind of like, it's big business now, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about when it's talking about revitalizing urban America.
Yeah, there have been some people that say that like attention or data is the new oil, right? There's some one. I think there's probably like just one big asterisk on that metaphor, which is that, right, like oil definitely does come from the ground, and we could say is natural, right?
Yeah.
It's like a bunch of dead stuff that under the ground, but attention and data is a social phenomenon, right? Like,
Right.
there's right, and so the creation of data or the phenomenon of attention is very human and social, and it's always dangerous to kind of assume that social things are natural and natural things are social, right? So like you want to pay attention to where that metaphor breaks down, and I think it breaks down fairly quickly. But yeah, I think it's also really clear that attention is big business, and that different people's attention is bigger or smaller business, right? Like I was floored. I was floored when I found out this was, I think, 2013, maybe 2012. This was a while. This is the very beginnings of this stuff, that I found out that I was told that the data of pregnant women is like 4 times more expensive than anyone else's because they're setting the purchasing patterns of entire households.
Right.
And they, and like, mom buying one specific kind of cereal will set someone's brand loyalty for the rest of their life, right? And so it's getting though that person's data is way, way, way more important than like 95-year-old guy that you can trick him into buying a gold coin or something, or like that stuff isn't like you give that a shot, that's fine, like that's bargain basement attention, but like the real real good stuff is like people that are just starting to form their life.
Yeah, I have 5 kids, so yes, I can tell you.
Okay,
Like,
yeah.
it's amazing
Yeah.
like you tell kids that this is normal, and they're just immediately like, yeah, and it
Oh,
will
yeah.
be normal forever, right? Like it takes so
Forever.
much
Yeah, yeah.
work to shift your habits. So that makes total sense to me. So as you talk about I love you have this term upscale, upstate. Talk a little bit about this authenticity that everybody seems to have, or at least everyone is claiming to have.
Sure. Yeah. So, there's a couple things. Some of it is, I suspect is generational. You want to be careful with what you attribute to generations, but like some of it, like the millennials that I'm a part of that grew up in the early aughts and late '90s. They grew up in the United States. A lot of them in suburbs, especially if they had a come from middle income families, and they rejected that, right? Like the rebellion of that generation was kind of a return to cities, and that can be attributable to everything from the television shows that were popular at the time. Everyone wants to be friends of the friends, or it's style trends, what have you, or even like more serious issues around like climate, right, and wanting to have a smaller carbon footprint. A lot of or just not enjoying driving, right? Because that would also be kind of the first generation that never experienced driving quite as much as freedom as a necessity, right?
A chore, yes.
A chore, yeah. And so they kind of like with fresh eyes were like, oh, actually driving sucks. I wouldn't like this actually sucks a bunch, and so you and so I don't know, for whatever reason, cities became increasingly popular, and but what actually city life is like uh, uh, can be told to you, right? You can have expectations set for you in a way that is what some tourism scholars call like socially constructed authenticity, right? This is like how with my students, I'll show them an old timey like 50s 60s era postcard from Hawaii, right? And I'll say, where is this? And they'll say Hawaii. And I'll be like, who here has been to Hawaii? And it's like, no one, or very few people. And I'm like, okay, then how the hell did you know that? You've never been there. Like, how'd you find that out? Right. I get, play a little dumb, right? But, clearly, but, and, they give me the obvious answer, right? That, you've seen it in media. And it's like, yeah, like think of all the places that you've never been, but that you have a preconceived notion of, right? Like, that's all filtered through media mostly, but maybe also like what your friend told you. Now think of how new that is, right? And that's that's a huge deal, right? And when we can think of not specific places like Hawaii or Detroit or Atlanta or Argentina or whatever, right? If you just think of categories of places like city, what starts accreting around that category are little signifiers, right? That can be anything from the coffee shop on a busy sidewalk to the Edison light bulbs that are hanging in the window, different forms of public transit that get kind of rendered into aesthetic rather than actual infrastructure, bike culture that far exceeds, kind of, I think some of the more practical elements of what bikes are good for. I don't know. Like now I'm going to get in trouble with a lot of urban. I work in a geography and planning department, and I'm not gonna get too in trouble about biking, right? Just all that I'll say is that bikes are like salmon or beavers in the Hudson River. If you recreate their natural environment, they will come back, right? But if you don't do that, only the people that are like kind of either by means or by ideology constricted into riding bicycles will ride the bicycles in anywhere else that isn't comfortable in order to do so. Okay, so I covered my ass on that. But like everything else is just like it's kind of just like we're kind of expected to have different kinds of city semiotics.
Right.
And those are opportunities for small business, everything from small business owners to the administrators and elected officials in cities themselves to say, oh, okay, well, if we want these hip young urban professionals with lots of disposable income to spend it in our direction, we have to kind of let them know, give them the signals, the imagery of urbanism, and then they'll come over here, right? And so that's why I actually open up the book with a description of an Instagram ad that I got from the Fulton County, New York. It's up in upstate New York. I don't think there's a population center above 50,000 people there. So it's very, very rural. But the ad that they give is like talking about how old their brick is and the wood floors, but also plenty of parking, right? And I'm just like kind of walking through like, what is this? Who cares how old your brick is, and who's the audience for this, right?
Yeah.
And the audience is like people who need maybe not class A but class B real estate, right? A small business that doesn't have a ton of public facing stuff, but you want to keep your office drones happy and have it look cool, right? To make it kind of feel like you're at Facebook or something, right? But you're not. And so you're in Johnsonville, New York, in Fulton County, right? And so they're like, you can get that experience for the cheap, and there's parking, so you actually get both. You get the suburban experience of free, limitless, unlimited parking, and also the urban stuff, and it kind of works, or at least it works. And we can get into more empirical stuff if you want, but like what it works really well for is increasing property values. Surprise. Right, it's really good for making things more expensive. It doesn't it doesn't really attract that many people, I have found. Or if it attracts a lot of people, if it attracts a lot of people, the way that you've done it, because it also raises property values, it pushes out or displaces about an equal number of people, and so the net increase in population is negligible.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, and I think I thought like you're talking about gentrification, right? Like, I mean, this is a new mechanism you're identifying in terms of social media being used to create gentrification through the attention economy. Is that a fair way to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and gentrification. Talking to my students about gentrification is interesting because they, like when people who are only like maybe 25 and younger have lived almost their entire conscious life post economic collapse, right?
Right.
And post the 2008 financial crisis is what I meant. And so not only do they have like no buying a house is so far off the radar for them that it's just like that's just never going to happen. But they also I don't know, place is a genre in a lot of respects, and different kinds of places are like Spotify music genres, but they're also when I talk about gentrification, they say, well, there's also some good stuff with gentrification, like the crime goes down and the there's street trees and stuff. I was like, that's not gentrification. That's making the place better, right? Like, gentrification is when people get pushed out, and it gets too expensive. And they were like, yeah, and that happens when it gets nicer. It's just like, it's this from the very, and it's really disturbing, but they're speaking a truth there, right? That because I think Harvey Malich described it this way. We all live lives on a real estate investment, right? We're all living on financial investments, physically, like literally physically living on top of financial instruments called land, and when we and so when we improve that land and we make it better to live on, by definition, the poor people don't get to live there anymore, right? It's only when you socialize that sort of thing, or you get the Georgian model of land taxing, that you can rearrange that. But otherwise, yeah, it's the same thing. Improving a neighborhood is the same thing as gentrifying, which is which is sad to hear, but is in a lot of cases, in most places, very true.
So I want to describe a little bit of what happened. One, I grew up in New England, moved to Central Florida, and then I just went back recently on a trip, and I was like, oh man, the age of these buildings is so cool. And so as you're talking, I was like, coming from Florida where everything is like, it's older than World War II because that's when the AC was invented, right? It's like post World War II. And so nobody lived in Florida because it was too hot. But
shout out Black History Month. Guy who invented the air conditioner. Florida, one of the Florida greats.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely makes it livable here. So as my wife and I work from home, we run our own company, and we were already working from home. But then with COVID, we ended up moving out from Orlando because it was cheaper. And so we see this, what they called Zoom towns, right? Where we were I remember going to, with my children to the playground, and there were some locals there who were complaining about the wave of people coming from Orlando and raising the property prices. And I remember saying, I'm really sorry, I'm one of those people, right? Like, they were like, oh, who are you? Yeah, I know. And how does that play into, is that exactly what you're describing, or is that kind of adjacent, this idea of working from home, and but because we don't have to be right next to things now, we can buy, was it Johnsonville? We can buy property a little further out with the unlimited parking. Is that a Zoomtown phenomenon?
Absolutely. It is. We were going in that direction already, and that whole region, like New York City and all points north, has this kind of ebb and flow nature to it, where it disgorges several like fairly well off people every once in a while, and they populate the areas around it, right? Like otherwise there wouldn't be all of these cutesy old buildings to buy in the first place, right? As if there wasn't this original, or at least much earlier move out from the city. So like, this is not the first time it's happened, and it was probably going to happen already anyway, as prices did their thing and made it difficult to afford to live in big cities. But the pandemic did clearly accelerate that timeline a lot. And in my book, I saw several instances of people of like real estate agents talking about how fast properties would go. Like I don't think I'm going to find the quote in a time that would make it worth uh, grabbing as I spoke. But you know, the what's nuts is that you know, like you get people saying like, you know, calling up a real estate agent and be like, "Is that property still available?" And they're like, "Yes." And they're like, "Does it have high speed internet?" And they'll be like, "Yes." And they're like, "20K over asking." Like
Yeah.
just you know, it's done, and they buy it. And like none of them had ever seen this before, and then you know the prices don't really go down after that for a long time, you know. And you know, we saw wild increases in population that were fairly temporary, uh, but um, but it was a massive move of people. I have Rensselaer County, which is a county on the east side of the Hudson River from Albany, um, had a 787% increase in address changes from New York City from that time the previous year.
Whew.
Yeah, you know, Saratoga County had 518% increase, and Albany was 126%, Schenectady 152%, right? And so this is this constellation of cities that, and like the towns around them are about 1 million people if you count all of them together, right? And you just had this like 3 digit percentage increase
Yeah.
in moves is like astronomical. And but what pencils out eventually, I'm just kind of looking at the table in my book here, you know, is stuff like, you know, amount of people with a doctorate degree went up 27%, right? uh Less than high school went down 14%. Finance and insurance and real estate and rental and leasing professions went up, or sorry, went down 17.5%, which is fascinating, right? Is like they're a lot of them are probably cashing out,
Okay. I
you
was
know.
wondering where that was going. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, or yeah, and so what you end up with, oh, and but art, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, food services went up 19% between 2009 and 2019. So this is actually, sorry, I meant to say that's pre-pandemic. It's leading up to the pandemic,
Ah.
right?
Okay.
Is this move where you're getting a lot more service sector people, right? 25% increase over that decade of service sector folks. But you're also seeing a high increase in people with high education degrees. And that
Right.
doesn't mean you just have like MFA students that are also baristas. Like there is that, but that's not all that's happening. What's also happening, although, you know, right, you do get stuff like that from the financial collapse, right? Because we're looking at 2009.
Oh
But
my
you're
gosh.
also
Yeah.
getting but you're also getting what Richard Florida called the creative class economy, where you get a handful of people in education, medicine, law, like these professional degrees. Uh, they're the creative class, and they're supposed to trickle down all of their genius and money to the working class service sector folks. That never really pans out, and he wrote like a whole book in 2017 saying, "Oops, sorry, that was wrong." But like, you know, the point of the matter, right, is that like this was starting, and then it really took off over COVID to the point that you know, today, you know, we had prices, rents went up. I think, you know, like I think it was like 200% on average, like a total. Like they went up significantly, but the actual population like went up slower than the statewide average in our region. So like we didn't. So the population grew a little bit, but it grew actually slower than the statewide average. And despite that, all of the prices for rentals went up way,
Right.
way beyond, you know, that. So, you know, what that tells you, one thing that tells you is that, you know, the price of housing isn't a supply demand curve. It's not a simple supply demand curve, right? There's something much different happening, and the thesis of my book is that, at least in part, it's this premium that you can charge for this kind of downtown lifestyle is at least part of it.
The downtown lifestyle with unlimited parking. Mm-hmm. Okay, forgive me, just for clarification, because I know that I think it was like, the 15 or 19% for doctorate and for service was over a 10-year period, but what was the 787% and the 518% increase? What time period was that over? Was that 10 years or was that pandemic?
Oh yeah, that was the pandemic.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that was just the pandemic. Yeah, on top of
okay, so that wasn't in the 10 years. That was like 2 years.
Yeah.
That was like boom. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just making sure.
That was like the first year. It was.
Oh my gosh.
It was really wild because anyone that could afford to get out of the New York City did.
Yeah.
Right? And they
sense.
just kind of went close by so that they could maybe commute in when their boss forced them to. Right.
Right.
Most of Hudson, New York, was the one that grew or got the most new residents, I think, of any city in the country. Little Hudson, New York, got that, and that was probably best. The avatar of that was Alison Roman, the like I think she was in Condé Nast, Bon Appetit for a while.
Oh, okay.
She's a food critic personality thing. Her name's Alison Roman. She has a big Instagram influence.
I have I've watched a couple. I do a lot of cooking, so I have seen her cooking.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah, she's great. And she got into an online feud with Chrissy Teigen. This is very important, right? And so Alison Roman and Chrissy Teigen get into this fight. And Alison Roman is on the losing end of like the popular opinion on this. I think there might have been. I think it might have had. She might have been just a teensy bit racist in some of the things that she said, or at least that's what everyone said. Not actionable, and so to flee both that and COVID. She moved to this area in Hudson, and then all of these glossy magazines would have after the Chrissy Teigen dust up, like, what is she doing now? And no matter what you asked her, one of her first responses was that I'm like crashing on a couch with a friend in Hudson, New York. She would always say that in like one of the first answers to any question, and you find out, and so I did a little bit more digging, and there's another thing that says that she had invested like almost silently or very quietly into 3 different area restaurants, and so she's correctly recognizing as a good businesswoman that like her investments in specific restaurants are not going to do well if you advertise the restaurant. You have to sell people on the area, on the whole area, and as that goes up, there's going to be these network effects, this clustering that happens, right? That will kind of like raise most ships.
Most people, when they go out for dinner, they're not planning 3 days ahead of time. They're looking for something within 15 minutes. So if you have a lot of people in the Hudson area, they're going to go for Hudson restaurants. Is there a particular, why not just say I'm living in the Hudson? Why say I'm crashing on a couch in the Hudson?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is to give it a bohemian mystique, if I had to guess.
I'm just like you.
One, I'm just like you, but also, part of the sell of smaller cities, right, is that like you can't, with a straight face, most of the time say like, we are the equivalent of New York City, right? Hudson, New York, New York City, but smaller, right? You can't quite say that, right? But what you can say is like the metaphor that I always like to use is, New York City is this name brand Neiman Marcus off the rack thing. But you, savvy consumer of geography and place, you're smart. You're not going to pay full price. You're going to go to a thrift store and find that nice, unique vintage gem on the rack, and that's Hudson. And so to crash on the couch in Hudson is to stumble across, some sort of vintage article of clothing or something, and you're just like trying it on. You're just trying it out because you also like don't want to seem like you're having too much. You're jumping into too much of a fad, but also real estate is so expensive that you do want to be cautious with how you advertise it. So you kind of soft pedal into it.
Well, okay, and I mean, I'm not gonna lie. This entire interview feels targeted at me. I'm not. We live in one of the top three cutest towns in Florida.
Yeah.
And so even as
I've been there. I think I know which one you're talking about.
Mount Dora.
It's adorable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No. And so as I look at there is the sell of like, oh, it's like Orlando, but you're savvier, but there's also that like one of a kind mystique, and I think that plays into what you're talking about with like the authentic thing. It's like, yeah, but you don't get that small town charm in New York that you get with a truly authentic. You know how old our bricks are? I can't get away from that early. What is this thing that we're selling? And you bring this out in a chapter in your book. What is this thing that you're selling when you're selling authenticity?
Yeah. So this is where like maybe this is why I'm on a philosophy podcast, right? Is that what ultimately what you're selling is like yourself, right? You're selling a version of yourself back to the customer. Because ultimately what these places kind of do is they offer what's called an existential authenticity, right? So I talked about socially constructed authenticity before, which is the Hawaii on a postcard thing, right? And that's just in order to feel authentic, you just have to meet expectations, right? You set expectations and then you meet them, right? You go to New York City, have a slice of pizza, and go to the M&M store in Times Square, and you're like, check, you did it. That's New York City, authentic New York City experience, right? But then and then there's also like what's called like objective authenticity, which is kind of like what an art historian does to a painting, right? You find out whether or not what something purports to be is what it says, right? This Rembrandt was painted by Rembrandt himself for, we find out all the reasons why that's the case. But existential authenticity is a way to kind of show someone or have them have an experience. It's often about experience where they feel like they are enacting their authentic self, and you're giving them the opportunity to do that. And so when you, right, and me too, I should say, like in my own book, I'm like, this is me too. Like I bought a house here, right? Like I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. I actually have I'm like interviewing a colleague of mine who like I have like all of these academic reasons of like why he's wrong, but like ultimately I just say like, nope, you got me. He's like, he's at some level, this is all very true, that like all of this stuff catches me, right? And people like me. I was on I'll finish. So like the existential authenticity is ultimately like, I always saw myself as this very urban a person walking around, got my baguette in a bag, and I go to all the different little shoppies, and I go, and then I consume some fine art or something, right? Like you have all these dreams for yourself and expectations that you create. And then life gets in the way, right? Like all this other stuff happens that you don't immediately resonate with, or you somehow create some psychological distance away from it. But then when you feel a moment of authenticity, what several theorists argue, and I do as well, is that like what you're not quite think you put it on the object when really it's the subject, right? The object feels authentic. The brick wall, the hand pulled espresso shot, whatever, right? All that stuff you think is the authentic thing, but in reality, it's the experience of you and the object. It's the object subject relationship, really, that is the actual authentic thing, and that's why we'll pay so much for it, is because it feels like it can't be done anywhere else, even though it can, right? But in another way, it can't, because the thing that you're actually enjoying is the subject object relationship. And that can only happen in that specific place at that specific time, actually, right? Now, there could be another parallel universe where you had this experience in Huntsville, Alabama, instead of Troy, New York. And I've been to both of these places, and they have the exact same coffee shop in them, right? They look the freaking same, right? But like, if life brought me to Huntsville, Alabama instead, I could have that same coffee shop experience and think, only in Huntsville, Alabama, right? Which feels nice, because it also means I made a bunch of correct choices through my entire life, right? And like, I am satisfied. And increasingly, when expectations get frustrated in a downwardly mobile civilization, frankly, right? As a those little moments become very valuable, and people will pay for them with like whatever scratch they have left.
Yeah, that validation. And I just, I'm trying to make sure I'm tracking with you here. Would another way to be put this, like, you have these stories about these destinations, even as you're talking about Hawaii, or New York, you're like, slice of cheese pizza, dirty water hot dog. Hawaii, gotta get a Bloody Mary or some drink and a pineapple on the beach, right? Like, there's like certain things you have to have. And if basically what people on the other side of it for economic reasons do is they create destinations that match the stories, and we pay for that because we want to be the characters in those stories. Is that almost?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. I think that's really good, which also dovetails nicely into, like, I don't know, there have been some think pieces in the recent years about like main character syndrome. Right.
Right.
Like the center, you're right. And like centering yourself as like, everything else is happening for you or something, like you're the only agent around, like, I think part of it is that too, but that's probably too cynical for the, I think it's a little too cynical even for me, because ultimately, because I situate myself in the book because as like someone who quote unquote fell for it, mostly because like I don't want anyone to feel like I'm judging them for participating in this system. Everyone does, and I cut myself off earlier, but like I was on This Machine Kills, this other podcast about technology and society, and the one of the co-hosts, Jathan, who I've known for a long time, he's like, yeah, I fall for this because I love food from a place. It's like,
Yeah.
If some, and what, this happened to me today actually, because I fall for this too. There was I was at the beer store, and I was looking at all the fancy little beers, and I buy a 4-pack of Tall Boys, right? He's like, that's like the new form factor for an expensive, nice beer, is you only get 4 of them, but they're a little bit more, right?
Right.
And and I get this porter, and I'm looking at this porter, and it says Tahitian vanilla in it. I'm like, Tahitian? It's like, oh, they know this specific kind of vanilla that it tastes like. It's like, it's not Haitian vanilla or Mexican, it's not all these other, because when you say it's one, it's not the others.
Yes.
Right. And that simple distinction means that like we're playing on a different ball game now, right? On a different level. Like now we want this is so specific that I have to know what I'm doing,
Yeah. So, and I, you say at the end, kind of what then should be done. Can you, I want to be conscious of your time here and respectful of it. What is, there's the fun aspect of this. I don't think anyone's really denying that, but what is problematic about this, and what would the solution to that problem be?
Yeah. So I'm a materialist, right? While we're talking about a lot of stuff that is literally existential, we've talked about existential feelings there, subject-object relationships, but ultimately I am a materialist, right? And one thing is that like all of these things work because of the particular moment in history that we're in, where like a lot of people are downwardly mobile, they have a lot of frustrated expectations, right? It's not a coincidence that the city authentic kind of rises up post uh, um, Great Recession, because it's a way to kind of affordably experience these things that prior generations could afford in mass
Right.
in most ways, and of course we have to say like mostly white people got to do this, right?
Right.
Cities were redlined, black and brown people are historically disallowed from having building generational wealth, right? And but no, very even fewer people get to do that, and so what you get instead are experiences of it, right? And everything from credit card points to these curated boxes of subscriptions of different kinds of stuff that you can buy, right? All of these things are meant to give you the experiences of luxury in little fits and starts, because that's the best you're going to get for now, right? And that's because of a particular economic condition of the moment. And I do draw a connection between this sort of like frou-frou hipster kind of retro vintage love of all things vintage or whatever, right? I do say that that's not too much far off from like the Make America Great Again stuff in a few key ways, right? Like one, it romanticizes the past, right? But it's not really saying like but of course they do very different ends. They have very different ends. They're not like one isn't like direct blood and soil stuff, but it is like this looking for the past for answers to future questions, and they're not, and none of them are really great answers. And what you end up with instead is this demand of like, I don't know, like all caps return spelled with a V, that isn't super great. And often have leans gets people thinking in these very reactive ways, and it also gives what you could call a home field advantage to reactionary politics, because we found there's been good research that in political science that shows right-wing politicians are able to leverage ideas of authenticity better than left-wing ones.
Interesting.
And so when we're all primed to desire authenticity in both people and places, what we're often primed for is looking into the past and more conservative thought, because progressive thought or socialist or communist thought has these different horizons of like what could be. And when you're thinking in the past of what was and how much that was better, those are opposites, right?
Yeah.
And we I think in the last couple of years have realized that culture and politics, the veil is getting extremely thin. So they kind of mesh and get us into weird directions.
That's really fascinating. As we end the interview, and the average person sees these Instagram or what I even hate saying X, but maybe Facebook ads. Like what is X? Anyway, don't get me started.
Yeah, the social media formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As they see these ads, as they go out and they enjoy their beer poured from Tool, levers,
Yeah,
just kind of,
polls. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What would you encourage our audience to think about over the next week, and to just kind of, what would be your big takeaway for them as they
Sure.
encounter this in everyday life?
Yeah. What one review of my book did, I really thought it would take longer, but someone realized that my book could be read as a self-help book. Um, and I knew, and as I was writing it, I thought a little bit about that was kind of what I was doing. And I guess it was more text than subtext, maybe, because at my the last chapter of my book, I do go through some, like you quoted it, right, like what should we do, right, what should be done, what has to be done. And well, one is like be good to yourself, like don't like, there's nothing really gets better with like diving deep into your mind and like, what does this beer really mean, and like, am I, like, is our coffee shops fascist, like don't do that, like don't do that. um or like I have a friend who, like, or like Troy, again, where I live, was a bunch of small business owners were trying to do a festival that they explicitly said they were kind of modeling off of South by Southwest. I was like, this is terrible. I don't want this. I don't want this for very specific reasons around, like, I would like to be able to live in my city and not have like Elon Musk show up and like give a talk about how like his new robot that will be your girlfriend or whatever. Like, I don't want that, right? And because like that's the inevitable like trajectory of those sorts of things. And but he's like, well, so you don't like bands? You don't like bands playing in bars? And like, no, I love that. I But you can just do that. You don't need to like create like a citywide 4-day festival that you pack a bunch of bands into, and you try to get everyone from outside to come in like that. We've seen where that goes, and it makes cities unlivable. So it's really like at that level of stuff, like where you just like, which ultimately I think that the one takeaway is like places should be where you live your life, not an experience that you pay for. And what that often means is that like, let bars be bars. Let them be the third place. If it's a funny theme, have a great time. And if it's the theme is the old hardware store that used to be there, God bless, have a great time. But like but like that one that can't be the substructure of your economy. It just shouldn't. You shouldn't do that, and it shouldn't come at the expense of building up an economy that gives lots of people good, predictable jobs that they can have for maybe most of their life. I don't know. That seemed kind of sweet to me. And that's why, like, maybe some people think my final chapter is like a hard left turn, but like the final chapter is like co-ops, union density. It's about all these different things that actually make places more stable economically and socially and more livable. And the one like real tangible connection there is that, one thing we didn't talk about, that kind of is a big theme in the book, is these things that I call the community control mechanisms that go throughout different cities, where it's like, it's your business improvement district. It's all these different what are called industrial development authorities. It's just kind of like hidden, not, like mischievously hidden, but like just so uninteresting that no one cares about them, kinds
Right.
of non-profity kind of industry groups that are tasked with planning our capitalist economy, right? Our economy is planned. It's just planned differently than the cartoon version of the Soviet Union that we all imagine, right? It's not North Korea, but it is planned. It's very much planned. And the people doing the planning get appointed by other people that you've never heard of, right? And so getting actually more involved at a local level, not just in like running for city council, though have fun doing that if you want, but also like finding out who are these people that work and or in most cases volunteer their time to these meetings that you could probably legally go to as an audience member. right? And find out how is all this coming together? Because what you'll find is that, at least in New York State, right, we have these things called regional economic development councils, and there's like 11 of them across the state, and they rate all these different proposals from private and public sector organizations for grants and low interest loans, right, and bonds and all this other fun stuff. It's free money, and it's like the Lester guy, with the question marks all over his jacket. It's free money, like that stuff. And you go, you can find out who these people are, and often enough, their day job will be like CEO of your local hospital. It's usually like some really big employer, or the university's provost or something like that, right? So their day job is that. But then, like in the evening, or like on a Friday at 4 p.m., they go to a meeting that sets like the employment targets for your county, where they try to figure out like, oh, well, here's our competitive advantage. This is what the workforce looks like regionally. This is how much housing we have. And now we're going to go ask our state senator to have a meeting with someone from Boeing to see if they'll put a brake pad plant for 737s in our district, right? And they're going to give them a ton of tax breaks. And at the same time, they're also going to make sure that maybe they'll shift the local community college to more of this manufacturing stuff, so that they have a workforce that can then work at the factory, right? This happens all across the country, and most people ignore it because it's boring, right? But what you notice, what actually turns out is that like the people whose day job it is to cut costs, and usually what are the largest employers in the region, are then also tasked with creating jobs in usually a larger jurisdiction. And so what you end up with are these people that, like, one, are sometimes caught between a rock and a hard place, where they have to cut costs on their day job and then increase their labor costs, supposedly at their in their free time. But it also means that like they're going to balance that equation in ways that better benefit them, right, and the people that can annoy them the most, right? Because they're also going to, like, if someone's annoying them with like protests or emails or whatever, right, they're going to like, I need them to kind of get a compromise, go away, right? And but no one's focused on these targets before as like a means of getting what normal people want. And so the one way out is to spend less time hand-wringing about whether or not your Friday night is authentic or not, or whether caring about it being authentic is bad or good. Don't do that. Just go have fun when you want to have fun. But also start paying attention to all of the ways that your locality, like all the jurisdictions that govern your life, how do they do that? And how does the money go to different places, and how can you control it with your friends the best you can?
What I love about that response is that we are heading into this election cycle, and we're going to get a lot of pressure for a lot of things that we feel like we have very little control of. And to be quite fair, we don't have a lot of control of. Still go out and vote, right? Be responsible. But instead, we would have far more influence over our own lives, and far more, we'd be far more of a force for good if we paid just a little more attention to the boring things, like you said.
PJ, this is the most important election of our life.
Well,
have you ever heard that before?
Oh my gosh! On that cynical note, no. Dr. Banks, wonderful to have you on today. Thank you. Fascinating topic. Really appreciated it.